Since tomorrow is the 4th of July, Independence Day, I thought it best to show the history of why we celebrate that and of our national anthem. So the Star Spangled Banner. There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key. He penned a song that I'm sure you are aware of. You have seen it, you've seen it in most hymnals throughout our churches. It is the national anthem. It is our song as an American. We go, however, to a ball game, we stand in our church services, and we sing the words to that song, and they float over our minds and over our lips, and we don't even realize what we are singing. Most of us have memorized it as a child, but we've never really thought about what it means. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain. Because of this conflict and the protagonist of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners and the British had prisoners, and the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, "Let us negotiate release of these prisoners." They said, "We want to send a man out to discuss this with you." They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards offshore. They said, "We want to send a man by the name of Francis Scott Key to come out and negotiate to see if we can make a mutual exchange." On the appointed day, in a rowboat, he went out to the boat and he negotiated with the British officials, and they reached a conclusion that the prisoners could be exchanged on a one-for-one basis. Francis Scott Key, jubilant with the fact that he had been successful, went down into the boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanities men. He said, "Men, I've got news for you. Tonight you are free. Tonight I have negotiated successfully your return to the colonies. You'll be taken out of this boat and out of this filth and out of these chains." As he went back up on board to arrange for their passage back to shore, the admiral came and said, "We have a slight problem. We will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it will be merely academic after tonight. It won't matter." Francis Scott Key said, "What do you mean?" The admiral replied, "Well, Mr. Key, you see, tonight we have laid an ultimatum for the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down their colors of that flag that they think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry, we are going to remove it from the face of the earth." Francis Scott Key replied, "How are you going to do that?" The admiral said, if you will, scan the horizon of the sea." As Francis Scott Key looked, he could see hundreds of little dots. The admiral said, "That is the entire British war fleet. All the gunpowder and all of the armament is being called upon to demolish that fort. It will be here within striking distance in about 2.5 hours. The war is over. These men would be free anyway." Francis Scott Key said, "You can't shell that fort. That's a large fort full of women and children. It's predominantly not a military fort." The admiral said, "Don't worry about it. We have left them a way out." Francis Scott Key said, "What's that?" The admiral said, "Do you see that flag way up on the rampart? We have told them that if they will lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately. We will know that they have surrendered and will now be under British rule." Francis Scott Key went down below and told the men what was about to happen. They said, "How many ships?" He replied, "Hundreds." As the ships got closer, Francis Scott Key went to the top and said, "Men, I'll shout down to you what's going on as we watch." As twilight began to fall, and as the haze hung over the ocean, as the sun set, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. Bang! The sound was deafening. There were so many guns that there were no reliefs. It was absolutely impossible to talk or hear. The sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. From down below, all he could hear the prisoners say, is, "Tell us where the flag is. What have they done with the flag? Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us." 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling, every time a bomb would explode and it would be close to the flag, you could see the flag in the illuminated red glare of the bomb, and Francis Scott Key would report down to the men, "It's still up. It's not down." The admiral came and said, "Your people are insane. What's the matter with them? Don't they understand that this is an impossible situation?" Francis Scott Key remembered what George Washington had said, the thing that separated the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is that he will die on his feet before he will live on his knees. The admiral said, "We have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart to shoot that flag down. We don't understand something. Our reconnaissance tells us that we have directly impacted that rampart again and again and again, and yet it is still flying. We don't understand it. But now we are about to bring every gun on that point for the next 3 hours." The barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down praying a prayer. "God, keep that flag flying where we last saw it." Sunrise came, and there was a heavy mist hanging over the land where the rampart was tall enough. There stood the flag, completely not descript in shreds. The flag itself was at a crazy angle, but the flag still at the top. Francis Scott Key went aboard and immediately went into the Fort Henry to see what had happened. What he found that happened was that flagpole and flag had suffered repetitious direct hits, and it had fallen. But men, fathers, who knew what it meant for that flag, who knew what it meant for that flag to be on the ground, although knowing that all of the British guns had been trained on it, walked over and held it up, humanly, until they died. Their bodies were removed and others took their place. Francis Scott Key said that what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were patriots' bodies. He penned the song, "Oh, say, can you see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? O'er the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that the flag was still there." It's kind of funny when you get emotional on stage and you have to wipe your eyes so you can read your notes. "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and of the home of the brave? The debt was demanded, and the price was paid."